Now, in terms of formality, there are 3 different types of email that we can send. The first email is the informal email. This is something that we might send if we already have a close relationship with the recipient. The second type of email we can send is the semi-formal email, which is sent to colleagues or someone we may have regular contact with. Finally, there's the formal email, which is something we may write to people when we're writing to them for the first time in a formal situation. Now, one of the things that people very often ask is, how formal should I write my email? So for example, if I'm writing to a client, should that always be a formal email? If I'm writing to my manager, should that always be a formal email? Well, it's not quite as simple as that, but there is a formula that we can use to make sure that we know the correct level of formality when we're writing to our colleagues, to our managers, and to our clients. It's called the formality formula. So there are 3 things that you need to consider the next time that you're writing an email and you're deciding exactly how formal it is that you'd like to make it. It's called T plus P plus M equals level of formality. What that essentially means is that you need to firstly consider the temperature of the relationship you have with the reader. Some people may have a very close relationship with their boss, so it'd be quite strange for them to go and write "Dear Mr. Smith" if they would usually be on first name terms with their boss. So you need to consider the temperature of the relationship held between you as the writer and the recipient. You also need to consider the purpose of your writing. So for example, if you're writing an email of apology, you're very unlikely to write that in a very informal style, and you would tend to write that with a little bit more of a formality level. We also need to consider the medium of the communication. Are we writing an email? Are we writing a formal business report? Or are we going and sending a text message? For example, it would be quite strange if we were to write a text message in extremely formal language. Now, when we're changing the level of formality, there are 6 main things that we can do to make sure that we change the level of formality in our writing. When we're writing more formally, the word could is used a lot more frequently than the word can. For example, could you return the document by 2 p.m? When we're writing more formal emails, we tend to use more formal synonyms. For example, require, receive, assure. These would be used instead of need, get, and promise. When we're writing a bit more informally, we tend to use more phrasal verbs. So for example, in a semi-formal email, we might say things like put off or think about. These are a lot more common in more neutral emails. The next thing you'll notice about a more informal email is they tend to use a lot more contractions. So if you're writing an email that's semi-formal or informal, you may use contractions like I'm, your, and won't. And these are things that you would see less frequently in formal emails. When we're writing informal emails, we tend to use more abbreviations, things like info and ad rather than information and advertisement. When our email is a more formal email, we tend to use more formal forms of address. For example, Dear Mr. Cole or Dear Sir or Madam. When we're writing less formally, we might say Hi David or Hello Mark. Now we're going to explore a phrase which is used quite commonly in professional emails. Very often people will write, should you have any queries, please do not hesitate to contact me. Quite common in many professional or formal emails. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at 6 ways to essentially say the same phrase and order them according to the formality level, starting with the least formal, going to the most formal.
Let's check the answers and see how you did. Match the formal phrases with their informal equivalents. Let's check the answers and see how you did. Now it's time for your end-of-lesson test. See what you can remember from the lesson. Now rewrite the email to make it more formal. Let's check the answers and see how you did. Great!